Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Okay, I just sold you out on Twitter.
Sold me out in the sense of?
You tweeted this thing about how Biden has China-phobic ads, and I...
Oh, geez. Am I going to have, have to go into my notifications and fend off your alt-right friends?
Not my alt-right friends. I said...
Your China hawk friends, which is...
I said it... No, I said if Biden's going to run China-phobic ads, how is he going to pick Kamala Harris as his VP when she's introduced a resolution condemning even saying the phrase Wuhan virus? And Josh Barrow, who's hardly a China hawk, hardly a Trumpist, said, "What is China-phobic about this ad? There's nothing China-phobic about it. He's just Biden is just saying that Trump was too worried about offending the Chinese to protect his trade deal." And I could have said, "Over to you, Bob." I didn't totally sell you out. I just said, "Good point. China-phobic may be too strong a word." So I sold you out.
Over to you actually would have been nicer, yeah. So when I look at my notifications, I'm going to see this reply from Josh that I've got to deal with. I hate this shit, man. This is what I hate about Twitter.
I thought over to you would have been like saying, "I'm just parroting Bob. It's not my fault," and I consciously used the word, so I should take some responsibility for it. Mm-hmm. You can respond or not, but you have a point. I mean, I just didn't want to make it for you, but you have a point.
You agree that this is a Biden ad. This is a Biden pandemic ad, and I tweeted something to the effect, and it has this little, Trump for fear of offending the Chinese did blah, blah, blah. And I just tweeted and said, so is every Biden pandemic related ad going to have a little China-phobic section? By which I didn't mean explicitly him saying you should fear China, but I mean kind of playing on and probably obliquely intensifying fear of China. And
he's saying he's tough on China.
Oh, he's saying he is, and Trump is a wuss because he's not tough enough on China.
Yeah,
and the subtext is China is this scary force that we should live in fear of.
Well, not necessarily, but a little bit of that. But ads have, a subliminal element and an explicit element.
Right.
And I could have said that defending you, but I didn't, so I sold you out.
You did. Now that I understand the entire situation, I would just like to point out that you sold me out. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Okay. Anytime. Otherwise, I'm fine.
Yeah, you're fine. You didn't get sold out. I didn't sell you out. You're doing great.
No,
you don't have friends who sell you out. It's not your problem. That's my problem.
You can make a very good case for your China-phobia point in a way that attracts a lot of attention and draws attention to your Nonzero newsletter, where you discussed this issue in 2 rapid-fire installments recently.
Several. So, I've done a number of pieces. The last one was a critique, shall we say, of Matt Stoller's argument as expressed on Glenn Greenwald's podcast, which I was a little off on that, and some aspects of that were short of perfect. I have to admit.
Anyway, it's an opportunity, Bob, not a sellout.
It's an opportunity. It's a promotional opportunity. But this is the part of Twitter and modern life in general that has held me back. Is just that the best way to become known is to be outrageous. And it's not that I'm unqualified for being outrageous. I can say outrageous things. I just don't enjoy the blowback. And this wasn't even that outrageous. I just don't. Anyway, enough about me. This is not my therapy session.
You're sensitive to Chinophobia.
I'm a sensitive soul.
And Biden. Yeah. And anyway,
so thanks, bud.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm fine. People are going to social distancing dinners now. Are they inviting me? No.
Well,
I mean,
I think what they think is that you're at about the right distance as it is, Mickey.
A couple of miles, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Don't let me interrupt.
No, I don't have that much to say. I mean, we should talk more about China before this is all over. We don't have to leap into it. I mean, what else has happened this week?
We're at a weird stage where something is awry. I mean, it looked like, and I still think that the states that locked down early did better. the lockdowns were a good thing in terms of if you just look in terms of the disease.
Not true, by the way, but go ahead.
But we're opening up, and the opening up so far so good. Why is it not true that the lockdowns were a good thing?
Last week you said so. Florida and Georgia opened, all is fine. Actually, now if you look at Florida and Georgia, as I recall, if you go look at the state by state graphs of cases in the New York Times, they put both Florida and Georgia under the stable category. There's three, like getting worse, getting better, stable. They put them under stable, but if you look at the graph, you see that, as I recall, both over the last few days show the number of cases increasing. And I went to that RT, that is for rate of transmission .live site, and checked them both over the past week. You click on a week ago, you click on now, and you watch the dot for each of them and see what it does.
Right.
Georgia's RT has gotten worse. Florida's has not moved.
Yeah,
So the night is young.
If Florida doesn't move and they open up, that's a win for Florida, right?
Yeah, that would be a win. But the average state has gotten better. I mean, the trend, pre-lockdown, the trend was things are getting better, transmission rate wise in most states. Yeah. And so, if that quits being the case after lockdown, that may tell you something. Let me just quickly say, so I think the post-lockdown effects are going to take a while to play out. It takes a while for more and more people to venture out. It takes about a week if you get the infection to feel strong symptoms. You may not go get checked for a few days. The results don't come in with some of these tests for another few days. So I would just, I would adopt a wait-and-see attitude.
Right. That's Tom McGuire, a very good blogger, said that this was the conventional wisdom. Wait and see. It's too early to tell. But so far, it hasn't been bad so far, okay?
Except in Georgia. Except in one of the two states, right?
No, it hasn't been. Was it awful?
It's not horrible. It's not horrible.
Okay,
no.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to be horrible. I don't think it's going to be horrible this summer.
Well, if it's not horrible, people are probably going to say that it was worth raising the.
No, but I think it's going to be.
You know?
I think it's going to be pesky and discomforting. I think there's, and people are going to go. I don't feel I just can't live my life with the abandon of yore.
Oh, sure.
And it's going to be weird, and things may start to pick up a little and may pick up more as it gets a little cool. And I don't know. I still think, Trump's biggest problem is going to be the economy, probably.
But because the anti-lockdown forces are totally on offense, and they say not only were the lockdowns unjustified, but lockdown, Alex Berenson says lockdowns kill people, and it does seem to me that it's a sort of puzzle trying to figure out, is it possible that there's a primary effect of lockdowns, which is they protect people by stopping transmission and between households, and there's a secondary effect, which is they encourage transmission within households, and once the primary effect is sort of shot its wad, the secondary effect actually may hurt a bit, or something like that. I'm trying to rationalize that we actually took the correct course, which is we locked down and then we let up.
Well, I think what we did more or less makes sense. I mean, if you're not going to try to go hardcore and shut it down, which is China's approach, and even they are having trouble. They've now suddenly locked down millions and millions because of a few infections. Is that your ringtone?
That is my ringtone.
Why don't you let me answer it? Just hold it up to the mic. I'll answer it.
No, let's let it peter out.
No, if you don't. And I think, for whatever reason, we didn't. I mean, I think, frankly, this administration is incapable of doing something that systematic. It would have been a challenge in any event. But if you're not going to do that, if you can't realistically try to shut it down.
What did try to do that we didn't do?
Well, just say we're going to shut the thing down, and then if we get even a few cases reported, we're going to go down into serious lockdown. I mean, in other words, they're not going for herd immunity. They're not getting near herd immunity.
In California, we are in serious lockdown. In New York, they were in serious lockdown. So most of the country was in serious lockdown. What did China do more than that?
Way more. I mean, when they say lockdown, they mean lockdown. They mean having a cop at the apartment building, like, telling you, no, you can't open your door and come out. They mean, it's just nothing like this. The intensity of the lockdown and the readiness of the whole, contact tracing system and everything, not to mention the sheer cultural compliance with norms, which, we don't have. We are like roughly the worst in the world at that, probably because of our fierce independence and so on. Okay. I don't think that was realistic, probably for various reasons. And as the title of one of our previous dialogues had it, we are slouching toward herd immunity, barring a vaccine.
Or therapy.
Well, therapy just lets you slouch more slowly toward herd immunity if there's never any vaccine.
AIDS, there's no vaccine. There is a therapy, and people don't really worry that much about AIDS anymore, as far as I can see.
Yeah, that's true. I assume very low infection rate, too.
I think we'd be happy to get to that point.
It would be an improvement. So that's where we are. It's still going to be a weird summer. Part of it is just the psychology of fear. It's like, lockdown puts you in this kind of binary mode, like, okay, I'm isolating myself from all threats. I haven't done anything remotely risk-taking for weeks and weeks, and that becomes the way you think. And then when they open up, you start having to do these things that, okay, entail very low degrees of risk, but you almost can't bring yourself to cross that barrier, right? And, like, walk into a Starbucks, even though if you look at the numbers, very low chances that in the course of picking up a cup of coffee, and so
I went to Trader Joe's.
How was that? Was that traumatic?
Harrowing. It's harrowing.
Yep. Was there social distancing?
There's social distancing, but they have live cashiers, and the cashiers don't seem to be taking it all that seriously.
What is a live cashier? Meaning they haven't died of it yet?
As opposed to a self-checkout.
Oh. So, did everybody wear masks?
You have to deal. Everybody's wearing masks. You have to deal with another person. Though. You can't just swipe your barcode and get the hell out of there. Mm-hmm. So that's why it was harrowing. And Trader Joe's tend to be pretty cramped places anyway. I mean, they're not spacious, So
yeah. Well, you should see New York supermarkets, as you know.
Oh yeah,
where space is very expensive.
So anyway, it seems to me that we haven't quite figured out whether the lockdowns worked and how does that jibe with the fact that ending the lockdown seems to have worked?
Well, it totally worked. I mean, in places like New York, New Jersey, there's just no doubt. I mean, you look at where we were headed, many more people would have died without the lockdown.
Yeah, that's what I think too. But
I don't see how anyone could doubt that.
We're losing the PR battle.
Why? Who is claiming otherwise?
Alex Berenson.
Who is Alex Berenson?
Half of the Trumpists are saying lockdowns were a terrible idea.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they're saying crazy shit. Yeah. I mean, it's funny to hear how Bannon has switched on this.
How has Bannon switched?
Well, initially, when I started listening to his podcast, he was like, "Bring down the hammer," just total lockdown for a month, blah blah blah. And now he's like ridiculing the wimps who are pro lockdown.
Right. Good point.
And by the way, if he is to be taken as a bellwether, and he isn't always, but he has been ahead on certain things, like the use of CCP. Never say China, always say it's the CCP, so that nobody can say you're being racist. He was ahead of the curve on that. That's been pretty widely adopted. He was. I don't know to what extent the blame Fauci thing is caught on. He's now full-throatedly anti-Fauci. That's a 180. It's funny. Last week he was blaming Redfield, and I think since then apparently somebody explained to him that the evangelicals still love Redfield, and so now he's calling Redfield a good God-fearing man and saying actually the problem is just the whole institution of the CDC.
You just raised two issues. One issue is there was a brief debate on Twitter whether if you believe in an afterlife, if you believe in life after death, you're less scared of death and more willing to take risks. So if you're a devout evangelical, you're more willing to open up because, you go to a better place when you die. And it seems to me obvious that that's true. Is that
it seems to me obvious true? It's not, but what's the grounds for it being obviously true?
You're less scared of dying if you're less scared of dying.
I grew up with evangelicals. No one I know wanted to die. It's like...
No, we're not saying they want to die. We're saying that the level of fear is a little lower. That's all.
I just don't think it penetrates your psychology that way. I really don't. And I grew up believing and believing I was saved, and still a chance I am.
Yeah, not after that tweet.
Not after that tweet.
The second issue is you wrote somewhere, I assume in your Nonzero newsletter, that we can't have this constant opposition to China without it filtering down into anti-Asian racism and bigotry. I don't see why that's true. We had a whole Cold War with Russia. If you saw a Russian, you wouldn't beat him up on the street. You wouldn't be bigoted against Russia. We were against communism, not Russians.
But you can't spot a Russian, Mickey. They're Caucasian. They don't look any different from what was back then an overwhelmingly Caucasian America.
Once you hear them talking, you can spot them.
But that's different. I mean, you don't. I mean, the people who are subject to abuse on the sidewalk. Generally, the abuse doesn't come to someone they were speaking to. It comes from somebody who just saw them and walked up, and half the time got their ethnicity wrong, but they were at least right that it was East Asian.
There are incidences of that, but it doesn't seem to be a major problem with having a Cold War with China. There are many other problems that are much worse.
Well, I actually have not emphasized this in the newsletter, but I've emphasized more the fact that there's a lot of things we need to cooperate with China on. You and I have discussed this a little, but I do think the racism is a real byproduct in at least some magnitude, and China just seems more distant culturally to people than Russia ever did. Russia is a Christian culture, and so on. So I think it's easy to, it is easy to probably easier to gin up fear of Chinese in Caucasian Americans, than of Russians. But even back then, I mean, to the extent that the identifier was communist, people identified as communists or communist sympathizers were subject to their own form of, repression. So, I don't know. But you're still pro Cold War with China, right?
Well, Cold War is overstating it.
You said decoupling. You're pro decoupling.
I'm into decoupling and having the society. I think it's more important that we fashion the society we want to live in, which is a society where unskilled people can earn enough to live lives of equal respect, and then have as friendly relations with the world as we want, but that doesn't necessarily involve massive amounts of trade. China can do what it wants. They're going to become a superpower on their own, even if they don't trade. And we should respect them and try to bring about change in a peaceful way without. And there's going to be a little bit of military confrontation. Is that a Cold War? I don't know if that's a Cold War.
I'm tempted to drill down on that, what you said about you want an America where everyone earns enough to get a certain kind of respect, because I thought the whole thesis of your book was that income inequality didn't matter. Forget about income. Respect can come from other sources. But I'm not going to drill down on that. I'm going to let you off the hook.
No, you're not letting me off the hook. If you go to my book, it says that obviously there's a minimum level of income you need to have equal respect. And in the 90s, it looked like everybody was getting rich, so we were easily meeting the minimum income level. And then all of a sudden, working class America hollowed out, and people's incomes actually started to go down. And it became a concern, and I started to worry about immigration and things in trade. But if you go to my book, the seeds are there.
Well, I think there are people who would say that the attentive observer was noting, even as you wrote the book, that the industrial base of America was starting to be threatened by low-wage foreign labor.
They were right.
Yeah, they were right. But anyway, but I want to instead drill down on the difference between decoupling and Cold War. So what does a Cold War have that
we did have the whole 2000 boom. But go ahead. Yes.
I take decoupling to mean a pretty thoroughgoing economic disengagement. That's what decoupling would literally suggest. And
right. Maybe you don't have to go all decoupling. We just have to preserve enough industry and onshore enough industry so that we can employ all our people at decent wages. And then if we want, cheap Chinese shirts, and I'm wearing one now, great. But, first we have to take care of get our own society in the shape we want it.
Well, if you don't mean by decoupling what the term would seem to suggest, then I have less of an issue with it.
Well, we're decoupling compared to now, but not total decoupling.
No, but I mean what people like Matt Stoller and Josh Hawley are saying is at least to judge by the way Stoller talks on that Greenwald podcast. I mean, they are both explicitly saying, make our trade divide, make ideology a big economic dividing line on the planet. They're saying, focus your trade on your democratic, on other countries where freedom reigns, on democracies. They are both saying that. And I super take issue with that because it seems to me, the last place you want to accentuate a fissure is between you and countries that you're already a little wary of and maybe a little antagonistic toward, because I do think trade, the interdependence fostered by trade, can be a pacifying, constructive thing.
Who gets cut off? That means we cut off Vietnam. That's probably a stupid thing to do.
You tell me who they have in mind. I think it's a completely idiotic idea, and I'm not sure Matt Stoller has thought it through, and I don't think Josh Hawley has.
How do they get around the argument that that's just what TPP was supposed to be, and why did we bail out of TPP?
Well, first of all, the actual somebody just tweeted this to me. Yeah, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the supposedly the underlying tactical logic of that was to freeze China out of it so that China would want to be part of it and then use that as leverage over China to, I don't know what came next, whether you do admit them, but on your terms, or you get them to make other concessions. But that, I think some supporters of TPP had in mind that would ultimately lead to a stronger economic, kind of relationship with China in a certain sense, or one that was stronger and more to our liking.
Right. And the critics said there was a backdoor that let China sell products anyway to all the TPP countries so that this pressure did not exist.
Or critics who might say, look, that's probably not going to work and you're just going to end up accentuating the divide between China.
Right. Anyway.
But can I just one quick thing on the decoupling thing is like, to anyone who means it in a strong way, and last week when you talked about it, one of your suggestions was, well, engagement hasn't made China any less authoritarian. Let's play hardball. In other words, your argument wasn't just an argument about the economic benefits, the economic nationalist benefits of disengaging, but the idea was you get a kind of leverage. I would just point out
there's hardball and hardball. Right now we're sort of their playpen. And we don't have to go full bore to a Russia-style Cold War.
First of all, let's don't overdo it. I mean, they make, they save American consumers a lot of money and give American consumers a lot of products they want for more cheaper than they could have it. That shouldn't be the only consideration, but don't act as if trade is entirely a one-way street. I mean, I agree we should. I
didn't say it was a one-way street. I say we're pretty open to their products, and it's managed to put a huge segment of our population in a worse position than they were.
But what I was going to say was, to anyone who thinks that any kind of thoroughgoing decoupling will, lead to the erosion of authoritarianism, we did a half-century experiment with Cuba, and that suggests it does not work. We just cut off economic relations with them. 50 years later, at least as authoritarian as ever. And, it's just, there's just no reason to think. And you just know in the near term what that kind of hostility does for an authoritarian leader. Overt hostility tends to strengthen authoritarian leaders. China already has a lot of nationalistic support for Xi Jinping. A lot of it. This is not a population that by and large is waiting to be liberated by the Americans. They are proud Chinese, and a lot of them support their leadership, and we're just doing him a favor to the extent that we look like we are persecuting them.
Don't you think that he'll always have enough to go on if he wants to start a nationalist campaign? I mean, if we had a 1% tariff, it would be like, he could start a patriotic campaign around that, fighting the Yankees' 1% tariff. I mean, it's but to the always a weapon he has.
To the extent that you start excluding the possibility of him getting fruits from a collaborative, cooperative relationship, he has more incentive to play his xenophobia card, the anti-American card. That's why this thing, once it gets started, and it may already be beyond the point of no return, given the fact that, well, as we alluded to, Biden and Trump are both playing the same card. Once these things get going, they have a strong internal logic, and things get worse and worse for quite some time. And
I assume it's going to get worse and worse now that China is cracking down on Hong Kong.
Well, yeah, and you have
to
ask,
as we speak.
And you have to ask, would they have done that if if it weren't already becoming clear that they're gonna look, what do they have to lose in terms of how America views it or anybody else views it? I don't know. They might well have, because a pandemic is an opportune time for that kind of thing. Obviously,
right? It's sort of a Joe Moore day for them, right?
What's Joe Moore? Who's Joe Moore?
Joe Moore is the British official who on 9/11 said, "Get all your bad news out now. Nobody's going to notice because of 9/11." So any day with a huge news event is known as a Joe Moore day. So if there's a huge pandemic, China can sneak in the Hong Kong crackdown without too many people noticing.
Well, but it's more opportune than that. It's not just that we're distracted by the pandemic. It's that in Hong Kong, if you have to keep 6 feet between you and every other person, that really cuts down on the intensity of your street demonstrations, And it's just a good time for authoritarians in general if people don't want to congregate in dense crowds.
It does seem that there's a logic of there was no way for them to contain it. It's like Tiananmen Square. At some point, they have to crack down.
In fact, I was going to switch the subject to Trump's authoritarian tendencies, but
go ahead.
Well, no, but first I would say
my brother will be very happy if you start talking about Trump's authoritarian tendencies.
Let's keep him on the edge of his seat for a few more minutes.
Okay.
On Hong Kong, I mean, so they were, Hong Kong was leased to the British. The lease expired in the late 1990s or something, and the deal they agreed to with Britain, for reasons, I don't even understand, because the lease was up. I think it was just theirs, right? But the transition deal they agreed to was that for 50 years they would stick with this one state, two systems. In other words, Hong Kong is like them, is part of China, but they give it a certain kind of autonomy. And some degree of that has now lasted for 23 years, I think. It's supposed to last for another 27, but it looks like it's going to get ratcheted down again. I wish it wouldn't, but at the same time, I'm almost surprised it's lasted as long as it has. I mean, it's like, it's like when the Wall Street Journal got sold to Rupert Murdoch, and he created some committee, including prior editors of the Journal, and they were going to help maintain its independence. And, it's like, no, Murdoch owns it. Give it up, And so in a way, I'm surprised Hong Kong has had some significant degree of autonomy this long, but I hope the game's not over. And I don't think it is. I think it's not clear even what's in this new Chinese directive specifically, or how much they're going to get away with.
It's an interesting question. Once people have, I don't use this word tasted freedom, but once people have lived a relatively free Western-style life, have they ever really successfully been subjugated into a super authoritarian regime? I guess Hitler would be one example.
Yeah, but that was pretty different. I mean, it's a good question.
I mean, Hitler sort of succeeded, right, in doing that. It's not clear that the communists succeeded, since they only lasted until 1989. In Czechoslovakia, for example.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, my hope had been that by the time Hong Kong was fully integrated into China, some of their attitude would have kind of at least infected China,
Yeah. But Iraq is another example. I mean, Iraq has had a free press, or a relatively free press, for a while. Are they really going to give that up? I mean, I don't know. It seems to me it's hard to give up.
You're trying to convince me the invasion was a wonderful idea.
No, I just think it's a complex calculation.
It is complex. So now, just quickly, for your brother.
Let's leave my brother out of it. I shouldn't have brought him up.
Never mind. I don't know. Do you even have siblings? I've forgotten.
I forgot to. I may have 100 siblings.
For anyone out there who's on the edge of their seat.
Okay. Trump's authoritarian tendencies.
I just wonder, if it weren't for the pandemic, would he have chosen this moment to quickly fire 4 inspectors general, which exceeds the number fired by any other president by 3, and I think only 1 or 2 presidents has fired even 1. Now that's not becoming Mussolini, I grant you, but it is another step in the erosion of an important norm and whose erosion helps presidents get away with shit.
We had a democracy before we even had inspectors general.
Still, they're a good thing.
I guess they're a good thing, but in normal times, the inspector general is hanging around, and if he sees something wrong, he can investigate. In the current time, the inspector general is probably going to be an Obama holdover who hates Trump and is looking for any excuse to bash the administration. We just live in different times. So you would think that if you were a Trump cabinet official, these people would start to get really annoying. I'm not defending Pompeo, but if you have a guy in your bureaucracy whose entire purpose is to fuck you up, you might want to fire him.
How do we know that's the case? I mean, the things they're investigating seem legit.
You really think it's a huge deal if Pompeo has his assistant walk his dog?
Well, there's also the question of the Saudi arms. Apparently, Pompeo, what did they do? Declare some emergency in order to keep selling arms to Saudi Arabia because they had to do it or something? And
correct.
And apparently that was total bullshit. And Pompeo made the decision and then said, go find me a rationale. And now that's not like illegal or anything, but I'm happy as a citizen to know it. I'm glad that there was an inspector general around who, as it happens, wound up illuminating it in a certain way.
But you wind up with cabinet officials spending half their time answering document requests from an internal watchdog, and at some point that's a call for the voters. No? Should we have sold arms to Saudi Arabia? Maybe yes, maybe no, but
the voters
we
deserve
also want
to know
cabinet
that it
officials who have time to do their damn jobs.
I think I'm happy for the voters to know that this was a total bullshit retroactive rationale. And that it's like on paper that it was. There's a third thing that Pompeo did, but anyway,
I'm Madison dinners. You're leaving out the Madison dinners.
Yeah, that seems kind of like bullshit. I mean,
really, that seems. The taxpayers should pay for these bullshit dinners. I guess so. Why not?
Well, I just assume that secretaries of state have a lot of dinners with a diversity of people, and some of them could be politically supportive in the future. I'm disappointed in you, Mickey, because I thought you'd be well versed enough in the history of inspectors general to say Barack Obama began the erosion of this norm by firing almost as soon as he got into office an inspector general who was not actually inspecting his administration, I think, but was inspecting a program run by a friend and supporter of his. I'm disappointed.
Was this the Sacramento Mirror?
It was Kevin Johnson.
Yeah. So there.
Yeah, you win.
Kevin Johnson's an interesting guy.
Is he a former NBA player?
Former NBA player, a relatively conservative Democrat. He's pro-school choice. I think he's married to the big choice woman from Washington, D.C. I'm going to misremember her name, so I won't say it. He's had a vague sex scandal. I mean, he's got all sorts of things going on. He may not be married anymore. I don't think he is.
Speaking of which, should we go there? Maybe we should.
Tara Reade?
No. Well, we should. Do you agree that the Tara Reade, that thing is dead?
No, it's not dead. But
it's dead.
No, it's dead. She's taken some.
It's dead.
She's taken some blows. I don't think she is enough in herself to torpedo Biden. Whereas 2 weeks ago, I would have said she might have been enough. Her credibility has been questioned with this degree stuff about she claims to have had a degree from Antioch, although I don't think but
not Antioch College, not the well-known one in the Midwest. I think it's some Antioch University in the Northwest or something, isn't it? Or maybe I'm wrong.
I think they're all over the place, and they're pretty loosey-goosey, and what they call a degree and what other people call a degree is probably more of a question of a range of things with Antioch than it is with
I think
Yale.
a degree, even at the loosey-goosiest of colleges, is a binary thing. There's like a list of people who have them. You know?
Well, she got into law school immediately after college on the basis that she had a degree. Was that?
Well,
that
raises
the
further
law
questions.
school never even bothered to contact Antioch and say, does this person have a degree or not?
I'm sure there are law schools that don't go through those.
But anyway, it's horrifying that she is an expert witness and people are convicted on the basis of her testimony. That's amazing.
On the credibility front, it's worse than that, right? First of all, did you read Katha Pollitt's piece in The Nation?
No.
You know, first of all, if you're a woman alleging, sexual abuse, you'd rather have Katha Pollitt on your side, and if you don't, that's too bad. Although Katha Pollitt, with one of the greatest leads ever, acknowledged that she's a Biden partisan. The first sentence of the piece was something like, "I would support Joe Biden if he boiled babies and ate them." In other words, she really doesn't want Trump to get elected. She acknowledged that up front. But the piece was still pretty persuasive in questioning Tara Reade's case, and this was maybe before the Antioch stuff, but it did link to a Politico piece. Did you read this about several people who recently have had really pretty close relationships with Tara Reade, at least in a business sense, like she stayed on their property or this or that?
Right.
Did you read it?
I did not read it. I read a piece by...
it's damning.
In the National Review, and I read a piece on CNN, both attacking.
The Politico piece is like these people, not quite using this language, but basically saying she's a grifter and a liar.
That was the Oppo dump. I think she's been damaged. I mean, the fact that she's flaky is not damaging because men are attracted to flaky women.
I said,
women.
Look, as of last week, as you know, I was totally agnostic, and I found her compelling when I heard her on Katie
You did? All right.
I found her pretty credible.
My new position is, my old position was Tara Reade gives the Democratic Party an excuse to dump Biden anytime they want to because, all they need is 10 women senators to say, I'm sorry, these charges are serious, and he's through as a nominee.
But I don't think that can happen now.
I don't think that can happen now, and I think you need another shoe. But I think all it takes is one more woman coming forward. And I'm not sure there are such women because, as people have said, this doesn't seem like Biden. Biden is incredibly handsy, but he doesn't seem like he doesn't seem like an assaulter. I have a story. A friend of mine, he's handsy with everybody, men and women. A friend of mine was sitting next to him at dinner, and he put his hand on his thigh. Biden put his hand on my friend's thigh and kept it there for the entire dinner, like an hour. Okay,
this was a male?
Yeah. I mean, he's a hands-on guy. It was nothing homosexual about it as far as I know. He just is a weird, handsy guy with men. And there are photos on the web of him putting his hand on the thighs of police chiefs. The police chief's like looking down at the hand. What the fuck is this doing here? I mean, he's just a weirdo. He's a weirdo in many respects. He's a huge bullshitter, for one thing.
Yeah, no, he's got those issues too. I mean, I still, well, the betting markets haven't changed. They're still give Trump a clear edge and leave like 6-7% room for somebody to replace one of the candidates. I don't know.
That's probably where I would be, even though the current polls show Biden ahead.
Yeah, but the betting markets aren't buying. And by the way, you and I had last week, you disagreed. I said Trump's approval rating now is at the top of the range of variation that he has had over the last 2 years. You doubted me. Do you remember doubting me?
I thought you said it was at the bottom. I don't remember this at all.
Well, no, what I mean was better for him than it has been.
I think it's about the same.
No, so here's the thing. So approval, this is his entire I know, I created this especially for you. I didn't sketch out the little... So this is from the Real Clear Politics poll aggregators. This is a bunch of approval polls. Approval is at the bottom, is the bottom line. Disapproval is at the top. This is where he is right now. I helpfully drew a line across to show you that is significantly better than almost every day of his administration. The only times that are clearly better are during the pandemic when there was a rally around the flag effect.
He's been basically flat since 2018.
I wouldn't call that basically flat. I mean,
usually
but
politicians.
Even there, okay, but even since then, this is at the top of that range of variation. Even since 2018. Anyway,
his approval ratings have been remarkably stable. They have improved since 2018 gradually, as that slide shows. I don't think it's a big deal one way or the other, what's happened in the last year. And you would think the pandemic would have had a huge effect. I agree.
Which way? I mean, in theory, a lot of
negative
because of his performance, but
yes.
Just generically, crises often have a positive effect and have had a positive effect for a lot of world leaders.
He's putting that principle to the test. I guess he's fighting it.
Well, I think the generic positive effect is being counterbalanced by his own deficient performance, and it comes out as net more or less nothing.
Yeah. I have a couple other things to talk about. What do you have to talk about?
What else? We could talk about the media in various aspects. There's been a lot of media, been a lot of firings, a lot of layoffs.
I wrote an article about the Atlantic. I wrote a tweet about the Atlantic layoffs. Their events business has collapsed.
Right.
And they laid off 60 people, most of whom were actually in the events section of their business. I wrote a nasty tweet saying this shows how much they relied on the inherently corrupting events business, because all these events are inherently corrupting because you have to have corporations subsidize them, and then if your big headliner is Bob Wright as Undersecretary of the Administration is going to be there, you really can't afford to piss off Bob Wright in the months leading up to the conference, because if Bob Wright doesn't show up, your whole conference collapses. So it has a conformist effect. You have to sort of be nicey with the administration, and more so obviously with the administrations you don't despise like Trump, but certainly with the Obama administration you had to be nicer to them than maybe you otherwise would be. But that was a little unfair of me, because actually only 22 of them were editorial employees.
What were the rest?
The rest were the people who put on the events.
Right.
So
I assumed it was mainly events. I mean, it was a weird press release because they said, this decision is driven by the tremendous success of our subscription drive. I'm like, whoa, plus a drop in advertising. It was like truly incoherent. And then they said, plus the events thing. And so I assumed.
I think it was mostly the events thing, but if the advertising dropped too, maybe that accounts for the editorial employees that were laid off. So, but I think the events thing clearly subsidizes the editorial side. I mean, why have it otherwise, right? So,
it certainly helps.
I think it's good that they're rid of that.
Well, it may come back. I mean, after the pandemic, the model could work again. And
then the other thing is, why didn't Ms. Jobs just write a check and subsidize it and take the hit.
You are not the only person on Twitter that question occurred to.
And Jack Schaefer points out that, well, and I think this is very common. Our experience with Marty Peretz would be similar. Rich people are willing to subsidize magazines. They're not willing to take a total bath on something that has no economic viability at all. So that would be, they're not willing to regard it as just a pure charity. They're willing to subsidize a going concern, and that was Schaefer's point. I think it's probably true.
True. I mean, Marty wasn't nearly as rich as she is, but
no,
but
she's
yeah,
the 36th richest person in the world. Or something.
I think it's true. As a rule, you don't get to be rich by being indifferent to profit and loss.
If I were laid off by the Atlantic, I would certainly be thinking that. Although the severance package seems so generous.
Oh, really?
It was almost like a buyout.
What was it?
I don't know what the details were, but it was like salary for 16 more months or something. It was 60 more weeks, I guess, maybe. It was still pretty generous.
Yeah.
Not in the current conditions, but in normal times, it would be a very generous severance, I think.
And then did Vice have layoffs before that?
Yeah, but
yes. I'm thinking that should be the death knell for their podcast, The Distance. In which case, The Distance would open up as a name for.
Well, the Atlantic has a podcast called Social Distance.
See, that just goes to show that whatever else you think of Vice, it is cooler than the Atlantic, right?
I don't know. I never got into Vice, even though it was funded by non-person Gavin McInnes.
Alt-writer Gavin McInnes, right?
A bizarre case of an alt-writer, and I met the guy. He's very enjoyable, slightly combative, but he invented hipster fashion. This alt-writer,
really?
Basically, with the hat and the whatever else they wear, the beard and the whole hipster business.
I thought it was more about like untucked shirts and
is people looking like Gavin McInnes. I mean, he invented that advice.
Is he one of the Proud Boys?
He's founder of the Proud Boys.
Jeez, and that's like a weird group, right?
Yeah, they're weird. They're less evil, I think, than people say. But I'm not going to completely defend them. But he then turned on them. He then turned on them in sort of after they were arrested in New York, and then he unturned on them. It's all very complicated.
And what was it they were originally proud of?
I don't know. Why are they boys? That's what I want to know.
Maybe I'm completely confused. So never mind.
I've met some of them. They're all perfectly nice people, but and they're not all white. But it is. They probably are guys who like to get into fights with Antifa the way Antifa likes to get into fights with the Proud Boys. That's sort of what happens. But anyway.
But this wasn't the group that started out like abstaining from masturbation? Am I just totally...
I think you may be thinking of the straight edge movement. Maybe not. I don't know.
I think this is part of the Proud Boys. Okay. I thought maybe that was what they were proud of.
I urge you to investigate this further.
Okay, I'll be in touch with them. If you know any of them, give them a heads up.
Anyway, I have a confession to make.
Is it related to the Proud Boys thing?
It's related to devs. Should we save it for the end?
I think I know what it is, because I think someone on Twitter pointed out to me something that we're saving for the end to keep everyone on the edge of their seats.
Okay, we'll get to
about the show Devs and something Mickey said that... Never mind. Okay. So wait, on the subject of the media, Mickey, I was thinking... Like, I sometimes feel inclined to criticize things I see in the media, and I think you do too.
Yeah.
And I was thinking we could have a feature called Boomer Media Scolds, because, we would be the boomers, and, sometimes we would be criticizing, millennials, young people. And in my experience, they view our generation with a respect bordering on reverence and would welcome the guidance. What do you think?
You should call it "Get Off My Lawn," but but that's
good.
That would be cliche. That would be a cliche.
Get off my masthead. Get off my... What could it be? Some of these people don't even know what a masthead is. That's my first complaint.
We can do that. We can. You have to have some sort of some bell you ring when we've entered the boomer hour.
Well, really, what might not be bad though is
the 10 minutes of millennial hate. How about that?
Yeah. And so all the haters could just skip till the end. But wait. Also, is it Gen Z that's after millennials? Are they younger than millennials? Gen Z? Generation
Z? This is why they claim that we're senile, Bob.
I think it is. I think X was taken, and maybe Y. I know X was taken.
That's right.
I know X was taken. But
I think Gen Z is after the millennials.
But
X
one thing
is before.
One thing that would be constructive is if often, maybe not every week, we had a criticism of both pro-Trump and anti-Trump media, both over-the-top or unwarranted pro-Trump and over-the-top unwarranted anti-Trump.
You're making this work, Bob.
I have candidates this week, though. I did the work for you.
Okay, go ahead. What are your candidates?
Just this morning, I look at New York Times lead story on the homepage. Drug promoted by Trump may harm coronavirus patients, study shows. I turn to the Washington Post. Lead story. Anti-malarial drug touted by Trump is linked to increased risk of death in virus patients. With all due respect, this study is such bullshit. It's not a controlled study. It's like they just went back and looked at people who were given, what's the name of the drug? Chloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine or something?
Yeah.
To the various variants of it. And obviously, it is going to generally be given to more sick patients because it does have side effects. You're not going to give it casually. And they tried to do a little statistical correction for pre-existing heart condition, but basically you cannot correct for all the variables. Now, it would, given the fact that the treatment itself is going to have that kind of bias, it would be big news if it actually lowered the death rate.
Right.
But the fact that it's, or was associated with a lower death rate, but the fact that it's associated with a higher death rate, I'm sorry, that's just not a story. I'm so
glad that you're a defender of chloroquine. That's so unexpected.
You know what, Mickey? I'm soaking in it.
The emerging picture of this drug seems to be that you want to take it early. You want to take it before you get to the hospital. You do want to sort of take it casually as a prophylactic. Maybe I'm not advising anybody to do this, but if it has value, it has value early in the process. Less than late in the process. Maybe I'm wrong.
I want to emphasize this study drew on people from hundreds of hospitals. There was zero top-down influence on what kinds of people were given it. It just So anyway,
I thought there was a control group. The one I saw, there was a control.
No,
group.
There's no control, and they were explicit.
There's another study this morning that might be a little more convincing. That had a control group.
But that's not what was. That's not what carried these headlines. Both of these stories noted there was no control, like 8 paragraphs in.
Yeah. Anyway, I wish I could remember this Chinese scientist who said, "I know you're supposed to take it with zinc because one of its virtues is it smuggles zinc into the cell."
I think zinc smuggles it into this. Oh, maybe it's the other way around.
One of them smuggles the other.
Yeah.
And the other, but then this Chinese guy tweeted early on, "No, you have to use this weird kind of chloroquine," and I can't, there's no way I can ever find that tweet. I wish I could. But that was the secret to using chloroquine is lost forever.
So just quickly, my pro-Trump piece I'm criticizing is by Josh Rogan of the Washington Post. He writes, as recently as January, it's about how, it just reads like a press release from China hawks in the Trump administration. It's about how now the administration is congealed around an anti-China policy, which is fine if it's true, and it's probably largely true, but he acts as if, until the final couple of paragraphs, has nothing to do with politics, and it's all because, they had really discovered that evil lies at the heart of China. So he writes, as recently as January, the administration appeared to be prioritizing good relations with Beijing in order to preserve the Phase 1 trade deal. But now, given China's gross mishandling of the pandemic, those arguing internally for more leniency have largely come around to a more hawkish. And he goes on like this elsewhere. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then finally, in the last paragraph, he does his to be sure paragraph and says, yeah, they're using this for political purposes, but that's only possible because, as polls show, Americans in both parties are souring on China as they learn how Beijing's coronavirus actions have worsened our suffering.
Do you have a viewpoint on him pulling out of the Open Skies Treaty?
Yeah, well, I don't know enough of the details. I know that they claim that Russia was violating it. We weren't. I'd want to dig a little more deeply. The people who think it's a bad idea are people I trust, so I probably, if I looked more into it, would be opposed.
What about restarting the START negotiations?
I get all these things mixed up. I mean, you know, he's dropped out of several arms control agreements, in at least two of them, like in the intermediate nukes one. He claimed that Russia wasn't playing ball, but pretty much everyone said what he did was worse than what he could have done. And on START per se, I don't remember any good rationale for that.
Well, anyway, my point is the crude one, which is he's not abjuring all negotiations. He's actually started an arms control negotiation with Russia and China, whether or not he's taking a reasonable position or not. It's not like he's saying all treaties are bad.
No, but he's saying a lot. I mean, he is trying to throw, I would say, broadly speaking, the wrench into institutionalized international cooperation. I mean, the most glaring example is what he's done to the World Trade Organization. He's basically paralyzed its dispute resolution mechanism, which was the most significant thing about it, in terms of the difference between it and its precursor, which was GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade.
One topic I wanted to bring up is this piece by Adam Serwer, if I pronounced his name correctly.
That's the way I pronounce it.
In the Atlantic, where it basically says I've been waiting for this argument, the not implausible argument that says, well, the deaths from the coronavirus are over-concentrated in the black and Latino communities, so of course Trump would be for opening up because it's just those colored people of color dying. And it's not a crazy idea, so it's not easy to argue against. But I have some arguments against it, one of which is Trump has always been for opening up. It's not like he was against opening up and then all of a sudden he said, oh, the corpses are black, well, let's open up. He was always reluctantly dragged into locking down, and as soon as he could get out of it, he got out of it. So that was sort of irrespective of the color of people. He has had friends who have died. I don't think it's enough to say the disease disproportionately affects blacks, which it does, and wildly disproportionately affects Latinos, at least here, which it does, because the white deaths still outnumber the black deaths in California, at least by 3-1, and presumably nationwide, many more white people are dying than black people are dying. So it's hard to write them off, and it's hard for Trump to write off black voters anyway, since he's desperate for black voters to win re-election. So
is he? I mean, does he have enough hope of getting them?
He has hopes of getting 5 more percentage points, and that's why he keeps harping on this First Step Act that he seems to feel will somehow appeal to the black communities, which is letting felons out of prison who were allegedly more minor offenders. He makes noises about it, and there are people like Jared Kushner who are telling him he can get more than expected, and that would be a death blow to the Democrats if he wins like 45% of Latinos. That's huge. If he wins 12% of blacks, that's huge.
Because, that's almost the opposite of an argument I thought you were going to make. I thought you were going to say in reply to Serwer, well, he's just following political logic. His base wants him to reopen. It's true. His base, when you look at working class people, is white people, not black people. But if it happens, but that's a given, and it's not because the people who are who are hurt by it are black. It's because they aren't part of his base. That's what I thought you were saying.
It fits much more easily in the thesis of he's doing what the red states want and he's fucking over the blue states.
Red states and the red parts of the swing states and blue states.
But that's sort of not a race thing. It's we're screwing over the liberal Cuomos of the world.
Yeah, that's what I mean. We're screwing over blue America.
Yeah, but that's different than
exactly.
I mean, and the other part is in California here. I mean, where there is, I only know one person who's had the virus. Everybody I know only knows the same one person who's had the virus. Nobody knows anybody who has the virus. It's all the people on the other side of town. So in theory, we should be pro-opening up. But in fact, the west side of Los Angeles, where they know nobody who has the virus, is the most pro-lockdown part of maybe America. They're total lockdown Nazis. So it doesn't quite.
Well, are they older? Is it an older? Is it an older demographic?
It's an older, incredibly liberal, PC.
And affluent people are very risk averse. I mean, their kids are more likely to wear bike helmets, I'm sure, and all that.
But they will sort of acknowledge that the risk to them is limited. I mean, it's dawned on them that they don't see. Yes, they're risk averse, and I'm risk averse, but it's dawned on them that this isn't happening on the west side of Los Angeles. Yeah, and yet they maintain their support for lockdown, perhaps because they don't want people to die. And that they're not racist, but
perhaps because they're affluent, highly risk-averse people.
Anyway, so you don't have a strong reaction to my.
No, I don't. I'm not. I have more than once been skeptical of an Adam Serwer argument.
Everything is race to this guy, and this is one of the.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
a bigger reach than most.
I wouldn't say everything is, but he tends to emphasize it. That's fine. I mean, we all have our things.
If you said that resentment of welfare was about race, you'd have a point. The welfare rolls are not disproportionately black. At any one time, they're probably majority black. So there's a huge disproportion. Over the course of a year, maybe they're majority white, although that was changing with the passage of welfare reform. But so there, I think, he has a lot more to work with than here, where there's just some sort of
it seems
medium-sized disproportion.
Yeah, no, the political logic behind Trump's stance is, I think, clear enough without invoking race. I mean, it's a combination of political logic and just the situation he got himself in by refusing to acknowledge bad news early on and every day saying everything's wonderful. That put him on a certain trajectory.
I blame Rush Limbaugh.
How is Rush? Is he...
He's still broadcasting. And my other topic, we're running out of topics, and we've only gone for like an hour and a half. No,
much less than that.
We've gone for an hour. The other topic is it's a guy named Ryan James Jerdusky, who's on my side on immigration, or maybe I'm on his side. He's written a book about nationalist populism. He's a very smart guy, and he was trying to explain why there isn't this holy grail of an alliance between the populists of the left and the populists of the right. I mean, they agree on trade. They agree on, rich people getting richer and screwing over less skilled, less rich people. One of the big stumbling blocks, which he is onto correctly, I think, is healthcare. The populists of the right just are so hostile to universal healthcare that the left people are never going to go along with them, and the populists of the right need to get an attitude adjustment on that. And if they embraced some form of universal health care, they would go a long way to solidifying this alliance. But the second big stumbling block to my mind is immigration, and trying to figure out why the left it seems hopeless for the left to come around on immigration, to my point of view. I ran for the Senate in California. I was a terrible candidate, but one of the main reasons I ran was to see if there was any purchase for pro-borders immigration control of the Democratic Party. And my conclusion was, no, there isn't. It's a sheer cliff face. You're going to fall and die. There's no room for my immigration views in the Democratic Party. There is in the Republican Party, and there used to be in the Democratic Party. So why are the Democrats never going to? And it's important not to confuse the views of the elites. The elites of the Democratic Party said, "Well, we have to let in Latinos because they're the future of the party. We know they're going to be liberals, and they're going to ensure liberals are ascendant for the next generation." Versus the voters who may not care that much about the institutional interest of the Democratic Party. And Jerdusky says, well, it's all because of wokeism, that I guess the Democratic voters are worried about seeming racist. And I just think it's worse than that. It's harder.
What's the exact part of the Democratic coalition that you would expect might be amenable to embracing your immigration position?
Well, I think virtually all of it. I mean, I think even Latinos are much less anti-border than the pro-border people would make it out to be.
A lot of white Democrats have their lawn done by immigrants at a reasonable rate. I mean, there's a lot of the
other argument. The other argument was that they like the cheap labor, but I don't think that stops good Democrats from doing what they think is right. If they thought it helped boost wages to control the border, they would otherwise do it, I think.
I think one of the biggest obstacles is just what the experience of Trump has done to the self-conception of Democrats. Yeah, that's going to get hard to get around. Clear. I mean, they have made it, a do-or-die issue.
Ryan was saying, why did 40% of Democrats support the wall before Trump and 10% after Trump? Well, that's because of Trump. Duh. Right. But that doesn't answer. The question is surprisingly hard to answer. I mean, why don't Democrats who are like our workers and will probably benefit from controlling the borders, cutting out guest workers, reducing illegal immigration so their wages would go up? What's stopping them? And
if you mean what's stopping them from becoming Republicans, a lot of it is the economic policies.
No, I agree with that. Okay, but what's stopping them from being willing to drop the immigration plank and join Republicans if in other ways like healthcare and economic policies and tax cuts, Republicans saw the light? And the answer, I'm just thinking of campaigning in California. The answer seems to be, and maybe this is completely incoherent, the Democratic Party is a collection of interests or grievances, however you want to call it, and it's sort of a package deal. And one of the main interests in California is environmentalism. Much bigger issue than immigration. Democrats who are in the party sort of care much more about environmentalism than they do about immigration. But for that reason, they buy into the Democratic coalition, and the Republicans have nothing to offer on environmentalism. So they're Democrats, and the immigration sort of goes along for the ride, and they're not willing to abandon the whole package for maybe another populist package that won't have an environmental plank. So it's not just they're not scared of being labeled racist or woke. It's more the transaction doesn't work for them, given that there are things they care about a whole lot more than immigration that the Democrats provide, like healthcare and like being green.
Could be. I mean, Democrats have their own version of this question, which is the what's the matter with Kansas question. Why aren't these working class middle Americans who would do much better under our domestic policy proposals, healthcare, tax rates, everything? Why don't they join us? They don't.
But I thought the answer of Frank's answer on what's the matter was sort of persuasive.
What was his answer?
The Republicans have convinced, I would argue with some justification, that it's the liberal Democrats who are the elitist snobs, and they're appealing to social equality. They're saying these, as George Wallace did, it's nothing new. As George Wallace did in 1968, these pointy-headed liberals are looking down their noses at you.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's enough to do it for me.
Well,
but that should I mean,
I'm not sure I'd be proud of that.
The populace should be able to use exactly the same argument on immigration, and they're not making those inroads with left-wing populists. That's the point.
Wait, they should be able to make what arguments?
That the Democratic Party is a bunch of elitists looking down their noses at you.
Maybe I'm confused. Anyway,
I'm not.
Anyway, back to your senatorial campaign.
Okay.
Your big mistake was giving up your Slate blog in a fit of hyper-conscientiousness.
What would that get me? What has blogging gotten me, Bob? It's gotten.
Well, we'll never know because that was the end of your blog at Slate. But
I kept on blogging. I just think my impression of blogging was it's fun while it lasted. It seemed bloggers had a lot of influence back in the day when there was no competition.
It would have gotten a lot of attention. Might have given your campaign a lift.
Virtually no residue in its trace. There's no lasting improvement in my life because I was a blogger.
Of course, your other mistake was saying I'm not in this to win. Which I thought would, I wouldn't have anticipated that would give them grounds to exclude you from the debates, which is what they did, right?
Yeah, well, they would have excluded me anyway. But it's a very tricky. You're sort of forced to lie.
You were running. What were you running for? Senate or?
I should have anticipated it.
What'd you run for? Congress or Senate?
U.S. Senate.
Jesus, Mickey, that's pretty audacious.
I started at the bottom.
Yeah.
The man in a hurry.
Who's Biden's vice presidential choice?
I handled that badly, but it's virtually impossible to handle well. That question. You have to say yes, I'm in it to win it, and then they say, but your support is undetectable in the polls.
Yeah, well, Justin Amash said I'm in it to win it right until he said I'm not in it.
Right. They all say that's the only answer. You have to lie. You have to say I'm in it to win it, even if you're not.
So who is Biden's vice presidential candidate going to be?
Well, I hope it's not Kamala Harris. That's why I sold you out this morning.
I think a lot of things point to that.
So I could trash Kamala Harris. She's awful. The character who plays her in Devs is much more convincing than she is.
I vote for her.
But I would say Klobuchar because I think he wants somebody who he's simpatico with.
It's pretty slim pickings.
She's not bad. She's not bad. What's so terrible about her?
I've told you 3 times. The combination of hair shake and voice quake gives me anxiety attacks. I can't be alone in this. I just imagine her sending waves of anxiety through America during debates. That's not the way to win anybody.
Surely they can train that out of her.
They had a lot of time to try. There was one debate where her hair seemed kind of under control. I was getting hopeful, but nope. Next debate came.
You don't think she can turn that into a positive? Like, look at the excitement. Her hair is electrified.
She's vibrant.
Yeah, there you go. She's pulsating with energy.
Yeah, that's what they should try.
Anyway, Walter Shapiro loves her.
Oh, in that case.
That's enough for me.
Yeah. It's slim pickings. I mean, honestly, I got to say Elizabeth Warren excites me more than either.
She's the most popular.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody gets along with her.
Well, compared to who? She's never thrown a stapler at you, has she?
Well, you don't want to work for Amy Klobuchar, but there are people in the world, Bob, who are nasty to underlings and respectful, nicer to people who are their equals or superior.
We have known
There's
some
a valid Darwinian explanation for that. And apparently Elizabeth Warren doesn't do that. She's unpleasant to everybody.
There you go. I want an egalitarian candidate.
So, I don't know. I don't think Biden can get away with putting his hand on her thigh. Let's put it that way.
That would be a good slogan for her.
I told you I saw Elizabeth Warren's stump speech, and it was so much better than I expected.
She's good. I mean, she is definitely the strongest combination of policy conversancy and rhetorical skill, including impromptu rhetorical skill, I think.
Do you really think the important things facing our nation are, do we have enough naderist, antitrust attacks on big corporations?
I think it's not a bad time to mobilize resentment of our corporate overlords.
The tectonic forces arraying against the working class are trade, technology, and immigration. It doesn't address any of them.
Well, technology, don't we associate technology with Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg?
You think if we break up Amazon, automation is not going to displace workers? No.
Does it matter whether we're not asking which policies do what, and we're asking what galvanizes voters, right?
No, we want it, Bob. We're not just in it for the win. We want to actually address America's problems.
I totally think antitrust action of a kind is in order with several of these companies. Here's what I think would be good once these companies get to a certain size, like Amazon, Google, whatever. Why don't they just say you can't buy any more companies? Because that's how they maintain their power. If Zuckerberg had not bought Instagram, he would be in a period of waning influence. This is how they maintain their dominance and discourage actual competition.
That is true. That would be a good rule.
And of course, Bezos, he doesn't just buy companies. First, he brings them to their knees with his predatory pricing, and then he buys them.
It's worse than that.
Oh.
Even if he doesn't bring you to your knees, if you have a successful product on Amazon, he will say you have a successful product, so I'm copying that product and I'm putting you out of business. So if he's nice to you, he kills you even if he's nice to you.
Well, that's one form his predation takes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I worry though that we're spending. The trouble with going on this long is, people at our age don't come up with new ideas very often, and so we're probably only a couple of weeks away from having said every interesting thing we'll ever say.
Well, that was the problem before, but, we were hoping that the disease would throw us new curveballs, but it hasn't. So maybe I should just do my devs apology and then we'll call it a day. It's an hour and 17.
I want to say a couple things, but go ahead and do your devs, and then I'll say my couple of things.
Okay. Last week, I have to put on my
I just want to say you are a big man. It takes a big man to admit that he was wrong and I was right.
You don't know what I'm going to say. I'm putting on my best Chuck Todd half-assed apology voice, which is last week I said on Blogging Heads that the Devs show was not in favor of the Everett Mini Worlds view because one of the lead characters had said with a voice of authority, I know that the Mini Worlds view is wrong. I went and looked for this clip and discovered.
By the way, wait, you're missing something. Last week I said you're wrong, Mickey.
Okay, well,
go ahead.
Fine.
Now you proceed.
And found the characters in fact saying that Forrest, a guy who did not agree with the Mini Worlds view, was wrong. In the scene on the dam with the kid who jumps to his death, we think. So that implies that if she is the voice of authority, that implies that the show is in fact pro-Mini Worlds, as you and Horgan said, not anti-Mini Worlds. But when I look, my weaseling is, it didn't seem to be such a voice of authority as I remembered it. She's sort of sneering at the kid because she's about to talk the kid into jumping to his death. Mm-hmm. So there's another possible interpretation, and I still think that the simulation that they're living in at the end is in no way a vindication of the Mini Worlds. It's the same woman replicating what the Mini Worlds would look like on the computer, but that's just a replication. That doesn't mean that in the real world that there in fact is a multiverse.
Now, I think the success of the simulation algorithm was contingent on the assumption Mini Worlds is right. And I think what they did with that simulation at the end was they went back into time beyond the point where, plot spoiler, earlier than his daughter had died, and then chose a different, then going forward in history, chose a different avenue along one branching point where she hadn't died and got into a simulation of a real one of the Many Worlds in which she hadn't died. That's what I think. But, we can settle this. Well, a podcast of our stature, we can just demand that Alex Garland explain himself. Here's
a dumb question that maybe is a good question. How often does this branching take? I mean, why when they were on the bridge, why wasn't there a branch when they were walking on the bridge where the kid didn't go on the bridge?
Well, there probably was. There probably was. I mean, that's the implausibility of many worlds. Is there's like we're not just talking like a dozen worlds here. You know, I think somebody estimated the number, and it's like a large number. How could they even
estimate if it branches off with the Twitter of a quantum?
I don't
molecule.
know. I mean, quantum physics is so mind blowing. I don't know. All I know is that I'm living in the house of the man who taught Everett his quantum physics. Thank you. But, yeah, so there's that.
And I still think the rest of my criticism of the show with the ending stands. So.
Yeah. I just thought it was worth, there aren't many shows that take philosophy serious,
As I get further away from it and get less pissed off at the end, it looms as a better show. It's a great show. Even if he fucked up the
I
end.
wish it could have gone faster. I mean, it's like, I was like, could we, and my wife would say, listen, just calm down. They're establishing how much he loved his daughter. And I'm like, can we just stipulate that he loved his daughter?
That part sucked. But the elegiac photographs of San Francisco were good.
Oh, yeah, a lot of good visuals.
Brought back your early days at the Presidio.
I'm telling you, man. Oh, speaking of which, I almost teared up when I heard. Did you hear that Kramer Books in D.C.? This is not in San Francisco, but in terms of nostalgia, Kramer Books is closing.
Yes, although there are things that have teared me up more in Los Angeles. But yes.
But see, I lived right near Kramer Books, and with my first book, I used to go in every day to see if any copies had sold.
Kramer Books was a great thing because it was a place you could always go at night. If you had nothing else to do, you could go hang out, and it would satisfy at least a third of your desire for social interaction.
And if if you met somebody for dinner or lunch there, you could browse for books while you waited for them to show up.
Right. It's a great institution, and it's. I agree.
It's sad.
But keep in mind, but they've let the institution die. I mean, the food there has been. You would never eat there on your own for the last 15 years.
Also, Tim Dugan Books. Did you like my tweet where I lamented?
Retweeted your tweet just because.
Do you know Tim?
No, but if you say he's a good guy, Bob,
he's a great guy. He's a serious editor. He'll probably stay in the biz. I mean, this is just his imprint that I guess will be no more. It's called Tim Dugan Books. It's part of the Crown thing. But, he published that quickie. You would not like this book, but the not quickie, but the short book on tyranny. Really little impulse buy book. It was a huge bestseller at the beginning of the Trump administration by this Yale historian, Snyder maybe? Anyway. One of his many strokes of genius. Yeah, that was Tim.
That's like Trump is. We're going to have Nazis goose-stepping down the streets. That didn't
and now I will say he did just fire 4 inspectors general. Just saying.
I think.
So
have I told you?
Yeah.
I've told you about my grandfather. Was born in Frankfurt. He was a German. He fought for Germany in World War I. The day he wrote a letter to his children explaining why they had to leave Nazi Germany, which he did a month after Hitler was elected. It's because the first day that Hitler was in power, they paraded Jewish businessmen naked down the street. Okay?
Wait, this is a long way. This is what year?
34, I think. There's a 33, 34.
That's kind of a warning sign.
Yeah, there's a long way between firing inspectors general and parading Jews naked down the street. So, I just want to note that. That's
true. Plus, it wouldn't be Jews with Trump. But anyway, no, I don't think Trump is going to do that to anybody. Let me stipulate that I don't think he is. Speaking of which, though, Connor Friedersdorf had a good piece about how, we shouldn't overlook the possibility that the reason Trump just hasn't handled the whole epidemic thing well is, Connor didn't put it this way quite, but it is that Trump just isn't very smart. And I think we should never lose sight of that possibility. Anyway, so as for names of the show, here's some should this become its own little thing? And by the way, in the meanwhile, if anybody wants to rate and review The Wright Show, which this currently is, and would remain, even if it branches off, it would continue to come for a while in the Wright Show feed. But anyway, they should feel free to do it. I just want to pause and say that, because I almost never make that appeal, but it would be so helpful. And it was
what if they rated badly?
Also, there's a lot of good Netflix stuff they could watch instead. I would direct them. I would just point that out. But if they've been listening this long, either they are a hardcore hater, in which case it'll be obvious that their review is not to be taken seriously, or they will be a lover. So wait. Pangolin Pals. This is one proposal from somebody whose Twitter name is Big Mood Lability. Okay. A private message on Patreon. Oh, that reminds me. You could also go to the Nonzero Foundation Patreon page and support us. This person says, my husband has a suggestion for a podcast with Mickey Kaus. You're going to love this, Mickey. It would be called Wright. That's W-R-I-G-H-T. Right and Wrong. You liking that?
Hey, if it gets us viewers, why not?
And now, you remember you had thrown out Experiment. Did you throw out Experiment in Human Sacrifice as a name?
Yes.
Okay. Gazim writes, as a representative of the podcast's allegedly small 20-something listener base, Experiment in Human Sacrifice is by far the most appealing name. Robert Reiter, that's me, should reconsider. I guess I had expressed disdain for that name, should reconsider if expanding demographics is the goal. We will take that under advisement. Thank you, Gazim.
How about Pangolin Picnic?
I still think Pangolin Delight is not that bad. Now, you remember the show Afternoon Delight, right?
The problem with Pangolin Delight is you're sort of having fun while hundreds of thousands of people are dying.
Isn't that the whole idea behind this podcast?
No.
Okay, so that's not it. But still, if you imagine, if we could get... Do you remember the name of the group that did Afternoon Delight? Which was truly one of the worst songs in the history of...
It was some Washington group. It was a local Washington
wasn't it called like Starland Vocal Band or something?
Yes.
If we could get somebody who sounds just like them to do it except with Pangolin Delight...
I could probably do it.
Because you know what Afternoon Delight is a reference to, right?
Correct. But
an afternoon sexual escapade. So this would be so edgy, people thinking about, let's just say it, sex with pangolins. This would be, this 20-something guy, he'd be like, screw Experiment in Human Sacrifice. Let's do Pangolin Delight.
I was thinking it'd appeal to boomers, but I guess not.
By the way, this 20-something guy could be a 20-something gal, as we boomers say. I shouldn't have said guy. Alex writes, every week I'm worried that this is going to be the week that you tell, he says this to you, that you tell Robert Reiter that you are calling it quits. Keep it up, guys. That's kind of poignant. I would point out that you're not the only one with leverage. In principle, I could quit, but anyway. And this is the best. Paul Deacon 1 writes, I think this is a YouTube comment. I could watch this relationship all day long. He's talking about you and me, Mickey.
Yeah, that's moving.
Are you getting misty-eyed? Is that the way reason you're turning your head away from the...
Yes, I don't want people to see me cry. I was thinking if this was our 10th episode, we could call it a grim milestone.
Call this episode a grim milestone?
We have a lot of grim milestones coming up. 100,000 deaths. Everything's a grim milestone. It's one of the worst expressions in journalism. Gives you an excuse to write a story that you probably should have written earlier or shouldn't write again. I can't believe Trump acceded to Pelosi and Schumer's demand to lower the flags to half-staff for the grim milestone.
Did he?
Did. Yeah.
Which milestone?
100,000.
So that's going to happen? The flags are going to go at half-mast?
He didn't say for the 100,000. He said in honor of the people who died for 3 days.
Well, it's two different counts. One is 5,000 ahead of the other one, so it's confusing. But grim milestone, you want us to call it that?
No.
We could. Oh. We may.
That's what when Michael Lewis... I was sort of heartened by this. Michael Lewis wrote a very good book about the also-ran candidates of...
Losers.
Of the presidential race called Losers. And America's booksellers rose as one and said, we cannot sell a book called Losers. So they gave it some stupid name like Trail Fever. And I noticed now it's called Losers again.
It is, yeah. There was a re-release or something. He finally had his way. No, they were like, it sounds like kind of a downer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Grim Milestone sounds like a downer.
Yeah. Final thing. You know, every week I list an elite listener. Somebody who listens.
Oh, I hate
not
this.
Every week. You hate this?
I hate this star fucking side of Bob.
Okay, last time I'll do it.
Okay.
So, now that's a term that Mike Kinsley used to do to refer to magazines that would publish a bad piece by a well-known person, right? This is different from that.
If you say so, yeah.
That's what he meant by that. So, and this is different. Okay, so it turns out one of our listeners is Dave the Roofer.
Okay.
Dave the Roofer. Do you not know who Dave the Roofer is?
I get him and Joe the Plumber confused. Am I wrong about that? I know they're both really big.
Dave the Roofer, weeks ago he tweeted to me that his name is Dave and he listens to us while he's roofing. He's a roofer named Dave. And then after I mentioned Andrew Sullivan as one of our elite listeners, he tweeted, I was really disappointed that the new elite listener was Andrew Sullivan and not Dave the Roofer. I'm up to 5 Twitter followers. WTF ? So
he has a sense of humor. Dave, if you're roofing, I salute you.
Yeah, I wonder if I could get a free
roof.
Nah, I probably wouldn't give me a whole roof. That's tens of thousands of dollars. Never mind. Okay.
Okay.
Once again, I'm going to hold off on my little remdesivir riff because I've already done one lesson in experimental methodology today. But I do have.
Look at this news study. I was disheartened, but
the hydroxychloroquine.
I didn't have your piercing intellect to critique it. So
the hydroxychloroquine. So you're saying the control study that shows that will.
I don't think it was a control study. I think it was another retrospective study, but they managed to cobble together a retrospective control group. I don't know. There was a control group. It's linked on Drudge.
Okay. All right. So another grim milestone, Mickey, which is to say another podcast by you and me, and presumably we will do this next week.
Yep.
Okay. See ya.
Okay. Take care. See ya.
Okay, wait. That was not the actual ending of the podcast, right, Mickey?
Right. It's like Wayne Newton in Las Vegas. We're going to keep it going.
Kind of like him. I wonder how many of our references go totally over the head of anyone younger than 85 or so. Anyway, Wayne Newton was once a real cultural phenomenon. So, speaking of which, we're going to talk about Ronan Farrow, who is commonly described as the son of Woody Allen and Mia Farrow. In fact, is not the biological son of Woody Allen, according to even Woody Allen, right?
I don't think he's admitted that.
Woody Allen said he's got Frank's eyes, meaning Frank Sinatra, who apparently was having an affair with Mia Farrow months before Ronan Farrow was born. Is that correct?
Is that true? I didn't know that. Anyway, I'm not an expert. He looks exactly like Frank Sinatra.
And not very much like Woody Allen. I guess that's redundant, but. So, anyway, there was this big, he became this famous Me Too journalist, I think won part of a Pulitzer Prize, right? He was working on the Harvey Weinstein case, the story at NBC, then he left NBC, did it for the New Yorker, New York Times broke the story, New Yorker followed very quickly with his additional information about Harvey Weinstein, and he's celebrated as a Me Too, hero. He wrote a book called Catch and Kill about how he was, Harvey Weinstein tried various dirty tricks to stop his reporting or something. And then Ben Smith this week, whom you have an issue with, which you can or cannot talk about as you choose. Ben Smith did a takedown of Ronan Farrow. It's like the New York Times right there on the front page, Ronan Farrow, too good to be true, ? Or something like that, right?
Yeah. Well, yes. And he scored some points on Ronan Farrow, but my point about Ben is a great guy. He's a charismatic editor, obviously a good leader. He's a good choice for the New York Times slot that he has.
He is a big improvement for them.
He is the straw that stirs the drink. but he's a little sloppy. And so I thought some of his critique.
Wait, should we or should we not do the full disclosure here, Mickey?
No, I'm about to do the full. He wrote a piece on me that was, it was very weird. It was a profile in BuzzFeed called "What the Hell Happened to Mickey Cows." When I first read it, I thought, gee, there's nothing wrong with this. This is a fine piece. He's saying I'm isolated because I was about to be a Trump supporter and, my immigration position and all that's true. And I'm leaving the life of a loner schlub. That was true. But then I got these emails from friends saying he's trying to make you look poor. Can't you see that? And I noticed in the third paragraph or the second paragraph, he talks about my small apartment with my decrepit car parked outside, and then his entire
sports car, though, right? Was that like a Datsun?
It's a Z car. It's a classic. It's one of the 50 most beautiful cars ever made.
Totally.
Anyway, it is not the car I drive, but it's just this car. I'm just a schlub. It's a car I have lying around waiting to restore it. But all of his millennial readers bizarrely took it as Kaus is a racist dumpster diver living in Venice. He's being punished for his
And they were wrong about the dumpster diver
views.
part. And they were wrong about the dumpster
He totally
diver.
missed the point. Look at my vast latifundia here. I'm hardly a dumpster diver.
Is that the same apartment he was describing?
No.
Well, that explains it.
But the apartment he's describing, I wouldn't let him in the apartment. So he didn't see the apartment, okay? He didn't know how big the apartment was. And I had this hilarious conversation with one of his underlings who said, well, I'm sure Ben wouldn't have written that it's a small apartment unless he had checked with the planning commission in the city and viewed the documents about the square footage in the apartment. And I said, I don't think that happened. So, he needed to put the word small there. He put the word small there, and it sort of was exactly the sort of careless mistake.
Well, was it a small apartment, Mickey?
It's 1,000 square feet with double height ceilings in one room. It's above average, not big, not small. It's a moderate, medium size, slightly above average apartment. Maybe if you're rich, you'd consider it a small apartment, although not even in Venice, apartments aren't big, so it wouldn't be considered small. But the point is, he was willing to fudge for the base of the narrative, and he had there were corrections out the wazoo on that piece.
Were there? Good work.
But my basic point was the small apartment. That was the key fudge that he stuck in there.
Okay.
And that's not all dissimilar to some things that, some of the criticisms he made of Ronan Farrow. And I don't think he was projecting. I think he may be a little self-critical, so he was taking some of his self-criticisms and applying them to Ronan Farrow. Anyway, he's guilty of a lot of the same sins that he said Ronan Farrow was guilty of. That's my only point.
Wait a second. Ben is guilty of the same sins as Ronan Farrow?
Some of them, yeah.
Like what?
Like my apartment's not small, and he said it was small.
Yeah, but
I feel like I'm reversed to the national anthem of Serbia is it's not small, it's not small. Serbia is not small, so I'm reduced to saying my apartment's not small, damn it. But,
there was.
but
I
yes.
think there was a correction at the bottom of his Ronan Farrow piece, but it was totally trivial. It was just like, as I recall, it wasn't even on the level of his apartment's not really so small.
My correction included that he said I was fired, and in fact I quit. So I say that's not trivial. From Daily Caller.
But so that's all you wanted to say. We're done now.
That's my piece on Ben Smith. Yeah.
Oh, this was really fun.
Did you expected more?
Well, I mean, what about the Ronan Farrow? Is Ronan Farrow gravely damaged or not?
No, I don't think he's gravely damaged, and he was helped by Matt Lauer immediately seizing this as a chance to weigh in on his Me Tooing and saying, see, I told you not to trust Ronan Farrow and to try to use it as a vehicle for rehabilitating Matt Lauer, which I think will backfire, even if Matt Lauer scored some good points. And the other thing is, some of his stories don't hold up, but even the most irresponsible of them, which was the Kavanaugh piece about Debbie Ramirez at Yale, where he supposedly Kavanaugh brandished his penis in the face of this poor, naive young woman at Yale. That was pretty carefully reported piece. Maybe it shouldn't have been published, but it wasn't badly reported.
But still, as I recall, look, I didn't like read the Ben Smith piece carefully in preparation for talking about it here or anything. But as I recall, there did seem to be like significant things that Farrow did not report that did cast doubt on at least some of the accusations against Harvey Weinstein. One of them was that, and I don't recall whether Ronan and Farrow, we know he had access to this information, but one of them is that one of the witnesses who I think corroborated ultimately or didn't try to undermine an account of the woman who said that Harvey Weinstein had forced oral sex on her, that an earlier this witness had initially told the police, I think, that the woman's first account was that it had been consensual. It was stuff like that. It was like significant.
There's a lot of stuff like that. But like one of the things that Ben makes a big deal about is Farrow claims that Hillary Clinton was dangling this interview for this other book that Farrow was writing, and holding it sort of hostage to try to kill his story on Harvey. Okay,
right.
And Ben Smith has a quote from the Hillary staffer saying, "No, I was just troubled. I was just troubled by that we are about to get into bed with this guy, and what if he turns out to be a rapist?" Well, everybody knew that he was guilty, whether Farrow got the 100% goods on him or only the 90% goods. So if Hillary's flack had not heard this, Hillary world was more clueless than even, my world. I mean, I knew it. So, that would explain a lot about Hillary's campaign if she was that clueless. I don't believe she was that clueless.
But she could have been.
B, of course, she was dangling the interview as leverage. Maybe it wasn't leverage to kill the story, but it was leverage to keep Hillary out of the story. You wanted to see what the story was before she granted this interview. That's standard operating procedure among flacks, and it's double standard among Hillary's flack. So why would Ben Smith naively believe this self-serving statement of Hillary's flack that,
no, but
we didn't want to get in bed with a rapist. If you mean Harvey's a rapist? My God.
As I recall, wasn't it more than a self-serving after-the-fact claim? Wasn't there some kind of internal communication within the Hillary campaign corroborating the idea that they were actually just trying to find out whether the Weinstein story was going to have legs?
Well, but that's no reason to delay the interview, and
if it undermines Farrow's account to some appreciable extent, it's worth. I'm glad I know it.
I don't think it undermines his. It was an email that he sent to a friend, I think. It was the email he sent to a reporter a reporter who bent it. He handles it like it's the smoking gun, and it's just not a smoking gun against Farrow. It's that this guy wrote that he could even have been totally trying to leverage Farrow into killing the story, and at the same time say we don't want to get into business with this guy if he's a rapist. It had very little probative value one way or the other, and the idea that it's put forward in this way that makes you think Ben Smith can't possibly be this naive and stupid.
I thought the unveiling of the internal communication was significant. It's like
he's a flack.
You think I'm being naive, but here's this big reveal. I thought it was reasonably effective.
He's a flack talking to an outside person, and you think he's going to say, "Hey, we're delaying this."
No, but again, that wasn't.
He's not. He's going to say something else.
But that wasn't the only evidence. That wasn't the key evidence. The key evidence was the internal communication, unless I'm totally forgetting, which I could be. But hey, you know what? You know what's not sufficiently appreciated in terms of ulterior motives? Do you know what may well have, what motivation could plausibly have put Ronan Farrow onto this case to begin with?
Which case?
The Harvey Weinstein case.
That everybody in Hollywood and half the world outside of Hollywood knew that Harvey Weinstein was guilty?
No. Here's what I was thinking. Name a person that Ronan Farrow seems to really not like.
Woody Allen.
Exactly. Who resurrected Woody Allen's career after he got into hot water? Oh, I forget whether it was over the what's her name? His Korean not adopted daughter, who he wound up is now married to or something, or whether it was the subsequent allegation. But Harvey Weinstein rescued, played a big role in rehabilitating Woody Allen. So
could be that, but
what do you mean could be that? Come on.
There's also, people are allowed to have personal
I'm
motives.
not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a fascinating fact.
It's also a little interesting that the New York Times chooses to discredit accusations of sexual harassment just when Joe Biden is facing accusations of sexual harassment and saying, well, maybe all women shouldn't be believed, which is, of course, true, but weird that they do it now.
Now that's interesting. I mean, that's like that's almost like a deep state level conspiracy theory, but I like it because of that. Interesting. I mean, but how would that come about? Like, it's not like, I don't think it's like Ben Smith would be doing Joe Biden's.
You don't need to give the hive mind directions. The hive mind just thinks, well, gee, maybe we shouldn't believe all women. This good woman, Tara Reade, really has problems. Maybe, like, all these other people have problems too.
Well, I'm wondering whether the Me Too climate is shifting partly because of Tara Reade, because again, I think...
Well, it's shifting in the right direction, so it doesn't bother me. But.
Well, I mean, to some extent. I mean, I do think some of the standards of evidence applied have not been strict enough. But, the pendulum could use a little bit of... could have used a little bit of swinging, but it's I had not put those two together. That's interesting. Whether they are both part of a kind of reckoning on the Me Too front.
Yeah, it was sort of. There was a tweet saying that Ben was so brave to go against his tribe and question a Me Too charge, which there was a certain amount of balls. He showed more balls in that job than I expected.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been a good column.
And he said things that his readers won't like, which I didn't expect. And
so much better. I mean, with all due respect to the guy who wrote what I think was basically the same column before him, their media, Jim...
David Carr?
No, Jim... Oh, David Carr was great. But no, Jim... But he's no longer with us. No, Jim...
David Carr was great, but he tended not to write things that the readers would hate. And the next... Rudenberg definitely wrote things. Is it Rudenberg? Is that who the guy was?
Yeah, I think that's the name, yeah.
The next guy wrote totally things that the editors would love.
Exactly. And weren't even interesting.
And this one, Ben is writing things that actually piss off a part of their readers, but they didn't piss off the pro-Biden readers. That's the point.
Fascinating point.
Oh.
Once again, we bring you insights that cannot be had on War Room Pandemic, starring Steve Bannon. Maybe
our title of our show should be "It's Not Small."
Wait, what would that be?
It's Not Small as the Serbian national anthem and the Mickey Kaus critique of Ben Smith. But,
The Apartment. It's Not Small.
It has various Freudian connotations too.
I wouldn't put that up there with Experiment in Human Sacrifice, but it's in my top 10. So the conversation continues as to whether this podcast, whether its name, and whether we have broken a record for length this time. Probably we have, but still we will have enough energy to be here next week.
It's not short.
It's not short. That would be good too. All of these are being taken under consideration even as we speak. See ya.
See ya, Bob.